At 7 in the morning, on a cold Tuesday in Providence, Rhode Island, a small restaurant on Atwells Avenue emptied out in about 4 seconds. Not literally, but it might as well have. The manager suddenly remembered a phone call he had to take in the stockroom. 2 servers decided their sections needed mopping again. The head cook, a man who hadn't left his stove mid-shift in 30 years, walked out the back door and lit a cigarette he'd quit smoking back in 2011. All because Luca Moretti had just pushed through the front door and sat down at the corner table. On Federal Hill, everybody knows that name. Nobody says it out loud. He's 37. He owns more of that neighborhood than the city does. And people have learned that the safest thing to do when he walks into a room is to be somewhere else. He didn't order, didn't open the menu, didn't look at a single soul. He just sat there, back straight, both hands flat on the table, so still that the whole room started breathing in his rhythm. 40 minutes went by. The water in front of him never moved. Nobody would go near that table. Nobody wanted to be the first one to make a mistake. Except one woman, Nora Hayes, 27, quiet enough that most customers forgot her name before they'd even paid, had been on her feet since the night before and had almost nothing left in her account. She wasn't brave. She wasn't reckless. She was just the only person in that room who was actually paying attention, and she'd noticed something about that table that nobody else had. So she didn't reach for her order pad. She walked into that kitchen instead. And when she came back out, every stunned face in that restaurant turned to watch her do the one thing not a soul in Providence would have dared to do. If you believe kindness still counts for something in this world, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe, so you don't miss a single story like this one. Now, let's head back to that corner table and find out exactly what she did. The kitchen door swung shut behind her and the noise of the dining room went away all at once. And Nora Hayes stood there for a moment with her hands hanging at her sides, because what she had seen at that corner table wasn't something she could explain to anybody, and she knew that if she tried, they'd tell her she was tired and seeing things. But she wasn't seeing things. There were 2 coffee cups on that table. 2. She had watched the busser set them down herself, 40 minutes ago, when the man had come in and lifted 2 fingers without saying a word, and the boy had been so frightened that he'd put them down and walked away backward. 2 cups, 1 man. And in all that time, neither cup had been touched, and nobody in the whole place had noticed that a man who owned half of Federal Hill had come in alone on a Tuesday morning and ordered coffee for somebody who wasn't going to show up. Nora had spent 5 years carrying plates for people who never looked at her, and she had learned to read a table the way some people read weather. A table told you things. Who was celebrating? Who was about to cry in the parking lot? Who had come in to say something they'd been rehearsing for a week? And that table was telling her something so plain and so sad that she felt it go through her chest like cold water. So she didn't pick up her pad. She turned to the stove instead. There was a pot of water already going for the lunch prep, and she pulled it forward and salted it, and cracked open the walk-in and took out what she needed. And she didn't ask permission, because there was nobody left in that kitchen to ask. She worked fast. Garlic in the oil, low, until it went soft and gold and never brown, because her mother had told her 100 times that if the garlic browned, you'd already ruined it, and might as well start over. Tomatoes crushed by hand. A little butter at the end, which her mother said was cheating and did anyway. And then, last, the thing that made it hers. The thing she had never once seen in another kitchen in her whole working life. A pinch of cinnamon into the sauce. Just a pinch. Enough to make somebody stop chewing and wonder what it was they were tasting. She stood over that pot with a wooden spoon, and she thought about her mother's hands, and about the fact that her mother had been gone 11 months now, and that she had cooked this exact thing on the last morning she was strong enough to stand at a stove. The pasta went in. 8 minutes. Nora watched the clock the way you watch something you're afraid of. Behind the door, she could hear the dining room breathing, that low, nervous hum of 40 people all pretending to eat. When she plated it, she did it carefully. She wiped the rim with her thumb, and then she picked up the plate and pushed the door open with her hip and walked out into a room that stopped dead the second it saw her. The manager saw her from the stockroom doorway, and his mouth came open and nothing came out of it. Tessa Lombardi, standing at the register, went pale and shook her head. One small, hard shake, the way you'd wave off somebody stepping into traffic. Nobody said her name. Nobody said anything. There was only the sound of her shoes on the tile. 20 steps, maybe 25. The longest walk she had ever taken in that building. Luca Moretti didn't look up. Not when she came around the end of the bar. Not when she stopped at the edge of his table. She set the plate down in front of him, right between the two cold cups, and she straightened up, and she said the only thing she had thought to say. Nobody should have to eat breakfast alone on a day like today. And then the room went so quiet that she could hear the refrigeration unit behind the bar click on. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. She stood there with her empty hands and understood, in a slow, sinking way, exactly what she had just done. And she thought about the 11 days she had left before the court order went through, and about the $311. And she found that she wasn't sorry, only tired. Luca Moretti still hadn't moved. He was looking at the plate, just at the plate. His hands stayed flat on the table where they had been for 40 minutes. And the seconds went by. 4 of them, then 8. Then more than anybody in that room could stand. Somebody's fork touched a dish, and the sound went off like a gunshot. And then, without lifting his eyes, he reached out and picked up the fork. He ate the way a man eats, when he has not been hungry in a long time, and finds out he is, slowly at first, and then not slowly at all. And Nora stayed where she was, because leaving felt like it would be worse than staying. Nobody in that dining room went back to their breakfast. They held their coffee cups and looked at the tablecloth and listened, and the only sound in the whole place for the next several minutes was a fork touching a plate. He didn't leave any of it. Not the sauce. He turned the last of it up with the edge of the fork the way people did in her mother's kitchen, and then he set the fork down across the rim and squared it, and he sat back, and for the first time in almost an hour, he lifted his eyes and looked at her. "Who taught you to put cinnamon in the sauce?" His voice wasn't loud. It was the quietest voice she'd ever heard ask her a question, and somehow that made it worse. She heard Tessa make a small noise over by the register. "My mother," Nora said. He didn't nod. He didn't move at all. He looked at her the way a man looks at a road he's driven before and can't quite place. "And what's her name?" 4 words. There was nothing in them. He hadn't leaned forward, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't so much as put his hand on the table, and still every hair on Nora's arms came up at once, because she had waited tables long enough to know the difference between a man making conversation and a man collecting something. And this was the second one. Something about the way he'd gone still again. Something about how he hadn't asked what her own name was. "Ma'am," he said, when she didn't answer. And she thought, later, that he had probably meant it kindly, and that was the strangest part of all of it. She opened her mouth. She thought of her mother in the hospital bed, 11 months ago, with that look she got whenever anybody asked about the years before Cranston. She thought about how her mother had never once put a photograph on a wall, and Nora Hayes, who had been raised to answer politely when a grown man asked her a question, heard herself say nothing at all. She reached down and picked up the plate. It was the only thing she could think to do with her hands. "I'll bring your check," she said, and her voice came out wrong. Too high, too fast. And she turned and walked away from that table without waiting to be dismissed, which was something she had never done to a customer in 5 years. She got halfway to the kitchen. Behind her, a chair moved. She didn't turn around. She heard him cross the floor, unhurried, and she heard the bell over the door, and she heard the door swing back and settle, and then the room let out a breath it had been holding since 7 o'clock in the morning. Tessa got to the table first. She stood over it with both hands pressed flat against her stomach, and then she looked up and her eyes were wet and furious at the same time. "Nora," she said. There was a $100 bill under the plate, folded once. Nothing written on it. Tessa picked it up by the corner like it might go off. "He didn't touch the coffee," she said. "Either cup. He sat there for the better part of an hour, and he didn't touch the coffee. And you brought him pasta at 7 in the morning and told him he shouldn't eat alone. And now there's $100 on my table. And I don't know if that's a tip or a receipt." "It's a tip," Nora said. "Honey, he asked for your mother's name." "I know. He asked twice. I know what he asked." "Then why didn't you tell him?" Nora stood there with the empty plate against her apron, and could not, for the life of her, come up with an answer that made sense out loud, because there wasn't one. Only that feeling, the one that had come up through her arms when he said it, the one that told her some doors you don't open for a stranger even when the stranger asks nicely, especially then. Behind them, the room had started to talk, low at first, and then all at once, the way a room does when something has happened in it. Somebody said the name Moretti, and somebody else said hush. The busser was crying in the doorway of the kitchen and pretending he wasn't. Out on Atwells Avenue, a black car pulled away from the curb and went up the hill toward the arch, and Nora watched it until it was gone. She didn't sleep that night. And at 11 the next morning, when she came in for her shift, the manager was waiting at the podium with her name badge already in his hand. Gregory Pierce didn't take her into the office, which was the part that told her everything. Because in 5 years she had never once seen him deliver bad news anywhere but behind that door with the blinds pulled. He did it at the podium with the lunch shift standing right there tying their aprons. "You're done," he said. "Effective now." He held out her name badge on his open palm, like he was returning something she'd dropped. Nora looked at it. "On what grounds?" she said, and she was surprised at how level her voice came out. "Unauthorized use of the kitchen. Serving an unordered item. Approaching a table outside your section without clearing it with a manager." He had them counted out. He'd been up all night counting them out. "Gregory," Tessa said. She came around the end of the bar with her order pad still in her hand. "Gregory." She cooked a man a plate of pasta. "Stay out of this." He ate it. He tipped $100. "What exactly is the loss here?" "The loss," Gregory said. And then he stopped, and his voice went up and cracked in a way that made 2 of the prep cooks look at the floor. "The loss is that I've got a business to run on this street, and she went and made us memorable. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? That man doesn't want to be talked to. Nobody talks to him. That's the arrangement. It's been the arrangement since before either of you were born, and she walked out there in front of the whole room and broke it, and now the phone's going to ring, and it's going to be me who answers it." He was shaking. That was the thing Nora would remember. He wasn't angry with her at all. He was frightened out of his mind, and she was the only person in the building he was allowed to be frightened at. Tessa opened her mouth again, and he pointed at her, and said one more word, "And you're done too." And Tessa closed it, and looked at Nora, and the look on her face was worse than anything Gregory had said. Nora took the badge off his palm because it seemed rude to leave it there. She untied her apron and folded it, and set it on the podium. Somebody in the back said her name, quietly, and she didn't turn around, because she had already learned that morning that turning around was how you found out who was willing to say it louder. The last bus down Atwells had gone at 11:40. She'd already missed it standing there. So she walked. It was 1.5 miles to Federal Street, and then another half-mile past that, and it was February. And by the second block she had stopped feeling her hands. She'd worn the wrong shoes. She'd worn the shoes she wore for a shift she wasn't going to work. Somewhere around the arch she took out her phone and called the number she had memorized without ever meaning to. The one for the recovery office in Warwick, and a woman with a pleasant voice put her on hold for 11 minutes and came back and told her, kindly, the way you'd tell somebody their flight was canceled, that the account had gone to judgment. "Judgment," Nora said. "Default judgment," the woman said. "Entered in December. There would have been a summons. I never got a summons. It went to the address on the admission paperwork. Ma'am, that was my mother's address. My mother is dead." There was a pause on the line, and it was not an unkind pause, and that was somehow the worst part. "The signature on the financial responsibility form is yours," the woman said. "You signed as guarantor at intake." Nora remembered signing it. She remembered a clipboard and a pen on a chain, and a woman behind glass saying just here and here and here, and she remembered signing it without reading it, because they wouldn't take her mother back through the double doors until she did. 60,000 and change. "What happens now?" Nora said. "The garnishment order takes effect in 11 days, the woman said. 25% of disposable earnings. If you'd like to set up a voluntary arrangement before then, I can transfer you." "There's no earnings," Nora said. "What?" "There's no earnings. I got fired an hour ago." The woman said she was sorry. And then she said the thing about a voluntary arrangement again, because it was the only thing she was permitted to say, and Nora said thank you, and hung up standing on the sidewalk in the cold, with the phone still against her ear for a good while after. She got home a little after 2. Her place was one room over the laundromat on Ridge Street, warm in a damp way from the dryers underneath, and the window looked at a brick wall 8 feet off. She didn't turn on the light. She sat on the edge of the bed in her coat, and after a long time she got up and got down the tin box off the shelf in the closet, the one with the recipes in her mother's handwriting, and she set it on her knees and opened it. And she thought about a man asking her twice, in the quietest voice in the world, what her mother's name was. It started raining sometime after 4, the cold kind that doesn't fall so much as hang there, and by 6, Nora had put on her coat again, because sitting in that room with the tin box on her knees had become something she couldn't keep doing. She needed milk. She needed to walk. She told herself both of those things, and knew that only the second one was true. She set the box back on the shelf in the closet where it lived, and she turned the deadbolt behind her, and she went down the outside stairs past the lit window of the laundromat, where a woman was folding towels, and she got to the corner of Ridge Street and stopped, because there was a black car at the curb, with its engine running and its wipers going slow. The rear window came down about 4 inches. Miss Hayes, the man in the back seat, was old, somewhere past 65, with a heavy face and reading glasses pushed up on his head, and he had a folded newspaper on his lap like he'd been sitting there a while and had come prepared for it. He didn't get out. He didn't open the door. "My name is Salvatore Grasso," he said. "I work for Mr. Moretti. He would like to know your mother's name." Nora stood in the rain with her hands in her pockets and found that she was not surprised, and that not being surprised was its own kind of sick feeling. "I already didn't answer that question," she said. "You did. He said to tell you he understood. That's why I'm here instead of him." Nora looked up the street toward the avenue. There were people out. There was a man walking a dog 40 feet away. Nothing in the world about that car said anything was wrong. "That's not my address," she said. "What?" "The restaurant. I never gave that address to anybody at that restaurant." Salvatore took the glasses off his head and folded them and put them in his shirt pocket. And he did it slowly, the way a man does when he wants you to have a moment to think. "You gave it to the payroll office 5 years ago," he said. "It's on your W-4. Mr. Moretti bought the note on that building this afternoon. Everything in the file came with it." He looked at her through the 4 inches of open window. "I'm telling you that so you don't spend the night wondering." He thought you'd rather know than wonder. "I'd rather neither," Nora said. "I understand." "Then tell him no." "Miss Hayes, tell him no. And tell him I'm not being difficult. I'm just a person who doesn't want to talk about her mother with a man she doesn't know." Salvatore didn't answer that. He reached across and pushed the rear door open on the curbside, and it swung out into the rain. And he didn't say, "Get in," and he didn't say anything at all. And Nora stood there with the water coming off the edge of the awning behind her and looked into that car. There was a tin box on the back seat. It was sitting square in the middle of the leather, out in the open, the way you'd set down a hat. Nora didn't move for a long moment. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a distant way, the way you're aware of a phone ringing in another apartment. She'd had it on her knees an hour ago. She'd put it back on the shelf. She'd turned the deadbolt. She'd been gone 15 minutes, maybe less, and she'd walked 40 steps. And here it was in the back of a car on Ridge Street in the rain. "He didn't take it," Salvatore said. "He didn't look at what's in it, and neither did I, and neither did anyone else. It's exactly the way you left it. He let that sit. He just wanted you to know he could." Nora got in the car. She did it without hurrying, and she pulled the door shut behind her herself, and she put her hand flat on the lid of the box, and she didn't pick it up. Salvatore said something quiet to the driver, and the car pulled off the curb and turned up toward the avenue. Nobody touched her. Nobody said another word for 2 blocks. The wipers went across and came back. "You could have just knocked," Nora said finally. He considered that for a while. "He's not a man who knocks," Salvatore said. "That's the whole trouble with him, and it's not going to get fixed tonight. Where are we going?" He didn't answer. Nora watched the arch go by overhead, lit up green and white in the rain, and then the car turned off Atwell's onto a side street she'd walked past 1,000 times without ever once looking down it, and she thought, with a clarity that frightened her, that she had gotten into this car of her own free will, and that nobody would ever be able to tell her otherwise. The car stopped in front of a bakery. Nora sat there for a second with her hand still on the lid of the box, and looked out at a lit window with trays of anise cookies in it, and a hand-painted sign over the door that said the family name, and, underneath, since 1961. Salvatore came around and opened her door and held it. And he had an umbrella, and he walked her the 6 feet to the entrance under it like she was somebody's aunt coming to Sunday dinner. "Bring the box," he said. "It's yours." The bell over the door was the same kind they'd had at the restaurant, and the sound of it went through her strangely. Inside it was warm, and it smelled like sugar and burnt orange peel, and there was an old woman behind the counter in an apron, wiping down a marble slab, and she looked up and put the rag down and said, "Oh, look at you. You're soaked through. Take that coat off. Sal, take her coat." "I'm all right," Nora said. "You're not all right. You're standing in my shop dripping. Sit." The woman came around the counter fast for her age, and steered Nora to a little round table in the corner by the radiator and pushed her into the chair with 2 hands on her shoulders. And then she was gone into the back, and Nora heard a burner click and a cup come down off a shelf. Salvatore hung the coat on a hook and sat down across from her and unfolded his newspaper and did not read it. "I'm Renata," the old woman called from the back. "Renata Moretti, before you ask. Yes, I am. And I've been putting up with it for 71 years, so don't make that face at me." She came back with coffee and a plate she hadn't been asked for, and set them both down. "Eat that. You're gray." "Ma'am," Nora said. "Renata, I don't want anything to eat. You'll want it once it's in front of you. Everybody does. It's not a trick. Nobody's ever been poisoned in this shop, and I'd hate to break the record on a Tuesday." "Sit." Nora sat, and after a minute she picked up the fork, because she had eaten nothing since a piece of toast at 5 o'clock that morning, and her hands had started to feel far away, and because the old woman was watching her with such flat, unembarrassed attention that not eating would have been the ruder thing. Renata talked while she ate. She talked about the shop, that her father had opened it the year Kennedy took office, and that the oven in the back was older than that and had outlived 2 marriages, hers and her sister's. She talked about the avenue, how it used to be, how the rent was now, how the young people were opening places that charged $9 for a coffee and put it in a paper cup the size of a thimble. She never once asked Nora a question. It occurred to Nora somewhere in the middle of all this that she was being handled gently and expertly, the way you'd warm a dish before you put anything in it. "Where is he?" Nora said. Renata stopped with the rag in her hand. "He'll come. He's not in the habit of being early to things that matter." She sat down in the third chair with a small grunt and folded her arms on the table. "Can I tell you something? You made him eat. I don't think you understand what you did. I made him pasta. Girl," she said it not unkindly, "he hasn't eaten a plate of food that somebody put in front of him without him asking for it in 3 years. Not from me, not from anybody." Nora set the fork down, and then Renata reached into the pocket of her apron and took out a photograph, an old one, 4x6, with the white border gone soft at the corners the way they get when they've lived in a drawer. She held it a moment. She turned it face down and slid it across the table and kept 2 fingers on it. "Before he gets here," she said, "'cause he'll do it wrong." Nora turned it over. It was a kitchen, a big one, a house kitchen, not a restaurant, with copper pans on a rail and a window behind. 2 women stood at the counter, with flour on their forearms. One of them was Renata, 30 years younger, laughing at something out of frame. The other woman was looking straight into the camera with a wooden spoon in her hand, and an expression Nora had seen 10,000 times across a kitchen table. The one that meant, "Sit down, it's ready, stop asking." Nora didn't say anything. She heard the radiator tick. She heard Salvatore turn a page he wasn't reading. 1999, Renata said quietly. "That's my kitchen, in the old house." Nora's thumb had gone over the woman's face without her deciding to move it. "That's my mother," she said. The bell over the door went, and nobody in that shop looked up except Nora. Luca Moretti came in out of the rain and took his time closing the door behind him. And Renata got up and took his coat without being asked, and went into the back with it. And she didn't come out again for a long while. He pulled out the 4th chair and sat down and looked at the photograph lying face up between them. "You showed her," he said. Renata's voice came from the back room, not loud. Somebody had to do it like a human being. He didn't answer that. He put both hands flat on the table, and Nora recognized the gesture from the restaurant and understood, in a way that made her stomach turn over, that it wasn't a habit at all. It was what he did instead of everything else. "Her name was Elena Rossi," he said. Nora said nothing. "She cooked for my family for 6 years, 1995 to 2001. She had the run of that kitchen. She fed my father, she fed my mother while she was sick. She fed everybody who came through that house on a Sunday, and there were a lot of them." He was looking at the photograph, and not at Nora. "She used to put cinnamon in the sauce. My aunt tried for years to get it right, and never could. And I've eaten in 19 countries and never had it again until yesterday morning." Nora's hands were folded in her lap, and she held on to them. "What happened to her?" she said. "She left." "When?" "On the 11th of September, 2001. He said the date the way you'd read it off a form. Nobody in this country remembers anything else about that week, and I've never been able to think about anything else. My father was arrested that morning, 6 o'clock, before the world went sideways, so it didn't even make the paper." He looked up then, I was 13. There was one person outside that family who had been in that house every day for 6 years, who heard what was said at that table, and knew who came to it, and knew what was in the office off the hallway, because she cleaned it. One person. And by that night she was gone. Not moved. Gone. She didn't take her things. She didn't come to say goodbye to my mother, who was too sick by then to get down the stairs. She didn't leave a number. Nora heard herself say, "Maybe she was frightened." "Everyone was frightened," he said. "My mother was frightened. She stayed." He let that stand for a moment. "I looked for her," he said. "Not the way a boy looks for somebody. The way a man does, later, with money. I've had people on it for 23 years. He said the number without any weight at all, and somehow that was the thing that told her he meant it. There's no death certificate for Elena Rossi. There's no social security number reporting wages, no license renewal, no lease, no property, no tax return, nothing in Rhode Island, and nothing anywhere else. She's not in the ground and she's not above it." He turned the photograph around with one finger so it faced her. "There is no Elena Rossi who exists after September of 2001. And Nora sat very still, because something had come loose inside her chest and was falling, slowly, the way things fall in a dream. She was hearing her mother's voice. She was hearing it saying the thing she had heard her whole life, the thing she had repeated to teachers and to friends and once to a man she almost married. "We moved to Cranston when you were 3. Honey, the schools were better," said easily. Said 100 times. Said the same way every time. The schools were better. Nora had never once thought to ask which school, or where they'd lived before, or why there were no photographs of any of it. "Because you don't interrogate the sky for being blue. My mother's name was Elena Hayes," she said. Her voice came out very small. Hayes was her mother's name. My grandmother's. Luca didn't move. "She died last March," Nora said. "At Rhode Island Hospital. There's a certificate. There's a stone out in Cranston with the wrong name on it, and I paid for it myself." Something went across his face then, fast, gone before she could read it. "Then she was alive," he said. "All that time. She was 40 minutes away." "Yes. She raised you." "Yes. And she never said the name Moretti to you. Not one time. Not ever." He sat back. The rain was loud on the awning outside, and neither of them said anything for a while, and Nora found that she was crying without any sound at all, which was a thing she'd learned to do at a hospital bedside and had hoped never to need again. When he spoke again, his voice hadn't changed at all, and that was worse than if he'd shouted. "Then I'll tell you what I've believed since I was 13 years old," he said. "My father went away for 11 years. He came home to a house nobody was living in, and the only person who could have stood up and said what she saw in that house, changed her name, and drove 20 miles and started over, and let a sick woman die without a phone call." He looked at Nora, and there was nothing in his eyes at all. "I don't think your mother was frightened, Miss Hayes. I think she was a coward." And Nora, sitting there with the photograph face up in front of her, and the tin box on the chair beside her, could not think of one single thing in 27 years that proved him wrong. Renata came out of the back and put a fresh cup down in front of Nora and took the photograph away, and it was only after she'd gone again that Luca said, "You were let go this morning." It wasn't a question, and Nora didn't treat it as one. "Gregory Pierce doesn't work in this business anymore," he said. Nora looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means he applied to 4 kitchens on the east side this week, and he'll apply to 4 more next week, and it won't matter. Nobody put a hand on him. Nobody will. He's a 50-year-old man with no references and a reputation he can't see and doesn't know how he got. He said it the way another man would report the weather. That's what happens to somebody who does that to a woman in front of a room." Nora set the cup down without drinking from it. "You didn't do that for me." "No," he said. "I did it because he did something stupid in a building I now own, and I'd have done it either way. But you can hear it however you need to. I bought the note on that restaurant yesterday afternoon. The owner's been 3 months behind since November. It's mine as of 4 o'clock today." He put his hand flat on the table again. "I want you to run the kitchen." Nora laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it. One flat, ugly sound in that warm little shop, and she put her hand over her mouth. "I'm not a chef. I've never been a chef. I ran a station for 11 months once, when the woman ahead of me had a baby. You cooked a plate of food yesterday morning that I've been looking for since I was 13 years old. That's not a resume. It's better than one." He named a number. It was 5 times what she'd made last year, and she heard herself say no before the number had finished landing. "No," she said again. "Why? Because I know what this is. Tell me what it is." "It's a leash," Nora said. "You want the recipe, and you want the woman who has it where you can see her. And you want to be able to say she came to work for you, instead of saying you went and got her. You don't want to cook, Mr. Moretti. You want an address you already have." Salvatore turned a page of his newspaper. Luca didn't move. $60,140, he said. Nora went cold. "That's St. Elizabeth Recovery Services out of Warwick, holding a default judgment entered in December on a financial responsibility form you signed at intake. The garnishment order takes effect in 10 days. You have $311 in a checking account at Navigant Credit Union." He said it evenly, without emphasis, and that was the thing that frightened her, because a threat would have been a kind of respect, and this was just information. "You had that before I walked in here?" she said. "I had that before I sat down in your restaurant yesterday morning." "Then say the rest of it." "There's no rest of it. That's what I'm offering. Take the job or don't. The debt is the reason you'll take it, and I'd be lying to you if I pretended otherwise. And I've decided not to lie to you about anything, starting tonight." Nora sat there with her hands around a cup she hadn't touched, and she thought about the 11th of the month, and about the woman with the pleasant voice, and about what it costs to be 27 years old and out of moves. "All right," she said, "but there are conditions. And if you say no to any one of them, we're finished, and I'll walk home from here." "Say them." "First, I cook and I order food, and I hire and I fire in that kitchen. Nothing else. I don't touch the books. I don't count anything. I don't carry anything. And I don't sign one piece of paper I haven't read all the way through and understood. If I ever open a drawer and find something in it that I don't understand, I'm gone that hour. Done. Second, the 60,000 isn't a gift." Luca's eyes came up. "It's an advance against my wages, written into a contract, with a schedule. And it comes out of my pay every 2 weeks until it's gone. And if it takes me 9 years, then it takes me 9 years. She leaned forward. "I'll take your money, Mr. Moretti. I won't take your charity, and I won't owe you a favor, because I've watched what happens to people on this street who owe you favors." Salvatore made a small sound behind his newspaper that might have been a laugh. Luca said, "Done." "And the third," he said. Nora looked at him for a moment, and then she said, "You'll eat breakfast there, every day." "What?" "Every morning, in that room, at that table. That's the third condition." He was very still. "Go on. And you won't sit alone," she said. "I don't care who it is. Him, your aunt, a man off the sidewalk. Somebody sits down across from you every single morning, and you let them, and you say good morning, back when they say it to you." Outside, the rain had gone quiet. Renata had stopped moving in the back room. "That's not a business condition," Luca said. "No," Nora said. "It isn't." He looked at her a long time. "You're going to be a problem," he said, and Nora picked up her coat off the hook herself. "That's exactly what you're paying for," she said. She came back to the bakery on Thursday because Renata had called her and said, "Come at 7, before we open, and bring nothing." Nora came at 7. The lights in front were off, and the ovens in back were already going, and Renata put her at the same corner table with a coffee, and sat down across from her with a pencil in her hand, and she didn't pick up a rag once the whole time. "Nobody's going to tell you any of this," Renata said. "So I'm going to, and then I'm going to deny I did." "All right. You start Monday. By Monday afternoon, every person who works for my nephew will have an opinion about you, and none of them will have met you." Nora waited. "Half of them think he's going soft," Renata said. "That's the polite half. 23 years, that man has been the same man every single day. And now he's bought a restaurant nobody needed, and hired a waitress off the floor, and he's going to sit in the window like a regular person and eat eggs. Men in that business don't do that. When somebody does a thing that men in that business don't do, the other men get very quiet and start watching. And the other half," Renata turned the pencil over, "the other half think you're an informant." Nora set her cup down. "What? Think it through the way they think it through. Dear, a woman nobody knows walks up to him in front of 40 witnesses. He starts moving money around and buying property he doesn't need. 3 days later, she's on the payroll with a signed contract in her name." Renata shrugged one shoulder. "If I were a suspicious man, I'd have questions. And there's more of them suspicious than there used to be. Because there's a rumor going around this hill that the federal people have been working on something for 2 years, and nobody knows what it is, And when nobody knows what it is, everybody starts looking at the newest face in the room. Is it true? What? The rumor. Renata looked at her steadily. There's always a rumor. Sometimes it's just a rumor. She let that sit. Then she said, and there's Arthur Delaney. Who is that? He runs what there is to run down in South Providence, which for 30 years was a smaller thing than what's up here. And for about 2 years it hasn't been. He's been taking the linen contracts. He's been taking the vending. Little things. Nothing you'd go to war over, one at a time. She tapped the pencil once on the table. That's how it's done, though. Nobody takes a house. They take a room a year until you look up and you're living in the hallway. Nora said, Why are you telling me this? Because you're going to be standing in a kitchen with a door to the street, and I'd rather you knew what the weather was. The bell over the door went. Renata didn't turn around. Nora did, and a man was coming in out of the gray with a folded umbrella and a smile already on his face. 60 maybe, heavy in the shoulders, well dressed in the way that's expensive without trying to be. Renata, he said, delighted, you're open. I'm not open, Vincent. The lights are off. Then I'll be quick and I'll pay double. He came to the counter and then he saw Nora and he stopped, and his whole face opened up, and he came over with his hand out. And this is her. He shook Nora's hand with both of his. Vincent Barone. I've known this woman since I was a boy, and she's never once given me a free cookie, so don't expect one. Nora Hayes, Nora said. I know exactly who you are, he said, and he pulled out the third chair without asking, and sat down in it, and leaned his elbows on the table like a man settling in at his own family's kitchen. Everybody knows who you are. Do you have any idea what you did on Tuesday? I brought a man his breakfast. He laughed out loud. A real laugh, warm and easy. She brought a man his breakfast, he said to Renata. Renata didn't laugh. Vincent turned back to Nora, and his voice came down a little, confidential, friendly. Listen to me. That man has been carrying something heavy for 3 years, and there isn't a person alive who's been able to put a hand on his shoulder about it. And I've tried, and his aunts tried. He shook his head, admiring. And you walked out there with a plate. He sat back. God, I wish I'd seen it. It wasn't anything, Nora said. It was something. He smiled at her, and there was nothing in that smile she could have pointed to, nothing she could have described to anybody later. He tapped the table twice with 2 fingers as he stood up, the way a man does when he's remembered something small and pleasant. I knew your mother, he said. Nora went still. She cooked beautifully, Vincent said. He put his hand on the back of the chair and pushed it in neatly, but she ran faster. And then he bought a box of cookies and paid for them, and the bell over the door went, and Renata Moretti sat looking at the door for a long time without saying anything at all. He came on Monday at 7, and he sat down at the corner table, and nobody sat with him. Nora watched it from the pass. She had 11 things going, and she watched it anyway. The room did what the room had always done, which was arrange itself so that no eye ever landed on that corner. And Tessa took his order and brought his coffee and went away fast, and Luca Moretti sat there with his hands flat on the table and ate alone in a room with 19 people in it. He did the same thing Tuesday. On Wednesday, Nora came out of the kitchen wiping her hands and stopped at the end of the bar and said, That's not what we agreed. I'm here, he said. That's half of it. I can't make a man sit down. Then you'll sit here every morning until one does. He looked at her for a second. All right, he said. On Thursday, which was the 4th day, Salvatore Grasso came in at 7:10 with his newspaper under his arm, and he crossed the room without slowing down and pulled out the chair across from Luca and sat in it. The whole room felt it. A woman at the window actually turned her head. Salvatore shook the paper open, and after a moment he said something Nora couldn't hear, and Luca answered, and Salvatore said something back, and the 2 men sat there for 40 minutes eating eggs and arguing about the Bruins. When Salvatore got up to go, he put $2 on the table for Tessa, which was ridiculous, and Nora saw Luca watch him do it. Friday, Salvatore came again. Monday, so did Renata, who had never in her life eaten breakfast anywhere but her own counter, and who complained about the coffee for 20 minutes straight while drinking 3 cups of it. And on the 9th day, a Wednesday, a man named Angelo, who had a shoe repair shop 2 doors up, came in for his usual coffee to go, and stood there waiting for it, and then turned around and looked at that corner table. Nora saw the exact moment it happened. 23 years of habit, and the man's shoulders came down about an inch. He walked over and stood beside the table with his hat in his hand. Mr. Moretti, Angelo, May I? Luca moved the chair out with his foot. Angelo sat down and turned the hat over twice, and then he said, I'm going to say something, and I've been meaning to say it for 2 years. And if I don't say it now, I'm never going to. Say it. The rent's too high. Nobody in that room moved. It's $4,000 a month for 1,100 square feet, and there's nothing in that building. No parking. The boiler's from the war. My father paid $280 for that same shop, and I know that was 1971, and I'm not a fool. But $4,000. Angelo put the hat down on the table. I fix shoes. There's nobody left who wears shoes you can fix. I do maybe 9 pairs a week, and I'm 68 years old, and I'm not going to be able to keep doing it. And the man who collects it for you. So, he stopped. And he was frightened. Anybody could see he was frightened. And he'd said it anyway. Luca Moretti looked at him for a long moment. What's the number that works? He said. What? What's the number where you stay open? Angelo's mouth moved. 2,200, he said. 2,200, and I'd be all right. Then it's 2,200, Luca said. From the first. Sal will see to it. And go tell Marchetti at the flower shop, I said. He can come talk to me himself instead of sending you in here to do it for him. Angelo laughed. It broke out of him, and then he put both hands over his face for a second, and picked up his hat, and said thank you, and shook Luca's hand, and walked out into the street, and the whole room watched him go. Nora stood at the pass with a plate in her hand that was getting cold. She had understood something on that first morning without being able to put words to it, and she had words for it now. Fear made a very quiet room. It made a room where nobody ever told you anything true, where a 68-year-old man went under for 2 years rather than open his mouth, where you could sit at the best table in the house with a view of the whole street and not know one single thing that was actually happening on it. That was what he'd been buying. That was all he'd ever been buying. That night she was breaking down the line at 11:30, and he was still there, at that table, with a folder open in front of him that he wasn't reading. She brought him a coffee he hadn't asked for and set it down. He said, You were right. About what? He didn't answer for a moment. He turned the cup a quarter turn on the table. 23 years, he said, and I couldn't have told you the price of a shoe repair shop on my own street. I could have told you what he paid and what he owed. I couldn't have told you he was 68. Nora stood there with the towel over her shoulder. She had the strangest impulse, which was to put her hand on the back of that chair, and she didn't, and she was aware of not doing it in a way that made her face warm. Get some sleep, she said. He looked up at her, and something in the flat gray of his face gave a little, the way ice does before it goes. Good night, Miss Hayes, he said, and she went back into her kitchen and stood with both hands on the steel for a full minute before she trusted herself to pick anything up. The woman was standing beside the dumpster in the back alley at 6:45 in the morning, in a coat that didn't fit the neighborhood, and she'd clearly been there a while. Miss Hayes. Nora had her keys in her hand and a case of tomatoes on her hip. We're not open. I'm not here to eat. She held up a card in a little leather fold and held it up long enough to be read. Claire Whitlock, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Out of the Providence office. She put it away. I'd like 10 minutes. Nora set the case down on the step. Am I in trouble? That's a complicated question, and I'm going to answer it honestly, which is not what you'll expect. Whitlock took a manila envelope from under her arm. Can we do this here? Or would you rather come to the office? Here, Nora said. Because if you come to the office, you'll be seen coming to the office. Whitlock looked at her a moment. That's right, she said. That's exactly right. And I'd like you to remember that you worked that out on your own, because it's going to matter to you in about 4 minutes. She opened the envelope. She didn't hand the pictures over. She held them up, one at a time, the way you'd show a child something on a shelf. The bakery on Atwells Avenue. Front door. Nora going in with her coat over her arm. Ridge Street in the rain. A black car at the curb with the rear door open, and Nora standing beside it. Ridge Street again, 4 seconds later. Nora getting in, 7:10 in the morning. The restaurant window from across the street. Nora at the end of the bar, and Luca Moretti at the corner table. And then the last one, which wasn't a photograph at all. It was a copy of a contract. Her name at the bottom of it. Nora's ears started ringing. $60,140, Whitlock said. Advanced against wages to a woman with no culinary credentials, 11 days after she was terminated from that same building for cause, by an entity that had owned the building for less than a week. in an amount that happens to correspond precisely to a civil judgment held against her. She lowered the page. Do you know what that document looks like from where I sit? It looks like what it is, Nora said. Her voice wasn't working right. It looks like a payment, Whitlock said. It looks like a structured payment made to a private individual through a cash-intensive business, with a paper cover on it. That's the textbook shape of it, Miss Hayes. That's not an interpretation. That's the shape. I read every line of that contract. I'm sure you did. I made him write it that way. I asked for it. He wanted to just hand me the money and I said no. Whitlock nodded slowly, and there was something almost like sympathy in her face. And Nora understood at once that the sympathy was real and that it changed nothing at all. That's very likely true, she said. It may even be provable, but you'd be proving it in front of 12 people in a courtroom on Kennedy Plaza. And you'd be doing it after a United States attorney had already decided to put your name in a caption. She put the pages back in the envelope. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You're telling me I could be charged. I'm telling you that where you're standing right now, a reasonable prosecutor could name you in a conspiracy count and sleep fine that night. Nora put a hand on the doorframe. The alley had gone very bright and very far away. How long have you been watching me? 2 weeks. How long have you been watching him? Whitlock didn't answer that, which was an answer. Miss Hayes, she said, I've been doing this for 26 years, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending I stood in an alley at 7 in the morning because I'm worried about your legal exposure. I want something. Say it. I want you to keep doing exactly what you're already doing, Whitlock said. Go to work. Cook. Don't ask anybody anything you wouldn't have asked anyway. Don't change one thing about how you speak to him, and carry a device. 6 months. Nora heard herself laugh. One short breath of it. You want me to wear a wire. I want you to record conversations you're already having. There's a difference, and it will matter to you at 3 in the morning. In exchange, the United States doesn't charge you. I'll put non-prosecution in writing, signed, before you do anything. And if it goes the way these things go, we'll relocate you when it's over. New state, new start. We handle it. Whitlock paused. What I can't do is touch that judgment. That's a private debt in state court, and the federal government has nothing to say about it. I won't lie to you and tell you I can make that go away, because there are people in my job who would tell you that, and they'd be lying. Nora stood there with the sun coming up over the roofline and the tomatoes going soft at her feet. And what if I say no? She said. Then you say no, Whitlock said, and I'll go do my job a harder way. And one morning, some months from now, you'll wake up and read your own name in the Providence Journal, and you'll remember standing in this alley. She held out a card, a plain one this time, with a cell number written on the back in pen. Nobody's asking you to betray anyone, Miss Hayes. I'm asking you to tell the truth about what you see. She put the card on top of the case of tomatoes because Nora hadn't taken it. Think about it, she said. And then, at the mouth of the alley, she stopped and turned around. There's something else, she said. It's about your mother, and I'd rather you heard it sitting down. They sat in a diner on Chalkstone Avenue at 9 in the morning, 4 miles from Federal Hill, in a booth at the back where Whitlock could see the door. She ordered coffee for both of them without asking. Then she put a file folder on the table and kept her hand on it. Before I open this, she said, I want to say 2 things. First, I didn't know your mother. I was in Boston in 2001. Everything I have is on paper. Second, I've read this file 11 times in the last 2 weeks, and I still don't understand it. And I'd rather tell you that up front than pretend. She turned the folder around and pushed it across. Nora didn't touch it. Just tell me. Whitlock opened it herself and turned the first page so it faced Nora. It was a form. Old. Photocopied badly, with a case number across the top, and a lot of it blacked out in heavy bars. But there was a name typed in a box in the middle of it, and the name was Elena Rossi. On the 29th of August, 2001, your mother walked into the federal building on Kennedy Plaza, without an appointment and without a lawyer, Whitlock said. She asked to speak to somebody about the Moretti family. She was 36 years old. She gave her address, her employer, and the length of her employment. Nora's coffee sat where it had been put down. Nobody sent her, Whitlock said. Nobody had approached her. She came in off the street on a Wednesday afternoon and told the duty agent that she had been cooking in that house for 6 years and that there were things she'd seen. Nora looked at the page and the black bars and her mother's name in a typewriter font. She was a witness, she said. She was a cooperating witness, Whitlock said. Signed, documented, opened as a file. She turned the next page. She came back on the 30th, and the 4th of September, and the 6th, and the 7th, and the 10th. Whitlock's finger went down a column of dates, and Nora's eyes followed it, and her chest was doing something strange. 6 sessions in 11 days. She gave them a floor plan of that house. She gave them the days of the week that certain men came to that table, and how long they stayed. She gave them the name of a bank. Whitlock stopped. There's a memo in here from a supervising agent that says, and I'm summarizing, that she was the single most valuable civilian source they'd had inside that organization in a decade, and that she was prepared to testify. Nora's hands were flat on the table on either side of the folder. Prepared to testify, she said. That's what it says. Then what happened? Whitlock turned the last page. It was almost empty, half a page of type. On the 11th of September, 2001, at 6 in the morning, they arrested Gennaro Moretti, Whitlock said. That was your mother's doing. That arrest happens because of what she gave them. Nora said nothing. And that afternoon she called the agent handling her and said she was withdrawing. Whitlock let it sit. She wouldn't come in. She wouldn't take a call after that day. They sent somebody to the house on the 12th, and she was gone. And there's a note here in somebody's handwriting that says the neighbor reported the family moved out overnight. And that's it. That's the whole file. There's nothing after the 12th of September. Nora looked at the half page. There has to be a reason, she said. There isn't one written down. Then ask her handler. He's dead, Whitlock said. 2014. There's no interview, no exit memo, no explanation of any kind. And I want to be very clear with you that I find that unusual. Because when a witness of that value walks away, somebody writes something. Nobody wrote anything. She closed the folder. The father did 11 years, she said quietly. He'd have done 30 if she'd taken the stand. Without her, there was no case worth having. And everything that family has done between then and now, it did because on the afternoon of the 11th of September, a woman changed her mind. And Nora sat in that booth and felt the last 27 years of her life go out from under her like a floor, because she was hearing her mother again. She was hearing her at the kitchen table in Cranston, with a bill in her hand, saying, "We don't owe anybody. We pay what we owe, and we don't take what isn't ours." She was hearing her at the front door of a neighbor's house, making a 14-year-old Nora walk back and apologize for something she'd said. She was hearing her say, over and over, for 27 years, the same thing in 100 forms. You do the right thing even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you. That woman had walked into a federal building with her own 2 feet, and then she had run, not been taken, not been silenced, run, in the night, with a 3-year-old, and changed her name, and never said one word about it for the rest of her life. Not on any birthday, not in any hospital bed, not at the end. "Miss Hayes," Whitlock said. Nora didn't answer. She was thinking about a man in a bakery, saying, I think she was a coward, and about how she had sat there and hated him for it, and how she had gone home that night and lain awake defending a woman she had apparently never met. "Are you all right?" Whitlock said. "Why would she stop?" Nora said. Whitlock looked at her for a long moment. "That's the question I came to Providence to answer," she said. "And in 2 weeks nobody has been able to give me anything but silence about it. And in my experience, silence like that has a reason standing behind it." She didn't sleep on it. She went back to the restaurant, worked the whole day, broke down the line, and at 10:30 she took off her apron and walked into the back office where Luca was sitting with Salvatore, and she shut the door behind her and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you both to hear all of it before anybody says anything." Salvatore folded his newspaper. Luca said, "Sit down. I'll stand. An agent stopped me in the alley yesterday morning. Federal. Her name is Claire Whitlock, and she's out of the Providence office, and she's been watching me for 2 weeks, and you for longer than that. Nobody in that room moved. She has photographs of me going into your aunt's shop, and getting into that car on Ridge Street in the rain, and standing at the end of my own bar. She has a copy of my contract. She says it's the shape of a laundering payment, and that a prosecutor could put my name in a conspiracy count and sleep fine." Nora kept her voice level with an effort that cost her something. "She wants me to carry a recorder for 6 months. She'll put non-prosecution in writing and she'll move me somewhere else when it's over. She said she can't touch the judgment because it's a state matter, and she told me that instead of pretending, and I believed her." She stopped, and then she took me to a diner and told me about my mother. The room was very still. Say the rest, Luca said. My mother walked into the federal building on her own, on the 29th of August, 2001, Nora said. She sat with them 6 times in 11 days. She gave them the house. The arrest that took your father was hers. Salvatore said something under his breath. And on the afternoon of the 11th, she quit, Nora said. No explanation. Nothing written down. And by the next day we were gone. She looked at Luca. So you were right. That's what I came to tell you. You were right in your aunt's shop and I sat there and hated you for saying it. Salvatore stood up. Enough. He wasn't looking at Nora. He was looking at Luca. Enough of this. She's been sitting in a diner on Chalkstone with a federal agent. She's had a card in her pocket for 2 days. And she's the daughter of the woman who put your father in Fort Dix. This is finished tonight, Sal. It's finished tonight. And I'll handle it. And you'll never hear about it. And in 6 months, you'll thank me. The door opened. Vincent Barone came in with his coat still on. And he must have been in the hallway. And Nora understood that he had been there a while. Well? He said. He said it gently. He looked at Nora with something that was almost pity. Sweetheart, he shook his head. You've already done it. What? You're already wearing it. No. Nobody comes in and announces it. That's not how a person behaves. A person who's afraid keeps her mouth shut. A person who's wired talks about being wired, because then it's on the tape that she told you, and she's covered when it comes out. Vincent spread his hands. Luca, I have known you since you were a boy, and I'm telling you what this is. He turned back to Nora, kindly. Take the coat off, dear. That's all. Take it off, and we'll all feel better. Nora took her coat off and dropped it on the desk. She pulled her sweater up to her ribs and turned around once, and put it down, and stood there with her face burning and said, Anything else? Nobody said anything. Luca hadn't moved through any of it. He was looking at the desk, and then he said, Take the deal. Salvatore turned around. Vincent's face didn't change, but something behind it did. What did you say? Salvatore said. Take it, Luca said. He looked up at Nora. Get the non-prosecution in writing first, all of it, before you agree to one thing. Have a lawyer read it. I'll pay for the lawyer and you'll pick him, not me. And then say yes. Luca. He said it to Nora and not to the room. Wear it. Come to work. Cook. And say exactly what you see. Every word. And don't soften one thing on my account. Nora couldn't find her voice. And starting tomorrow, Luca said, you're not going to see anything that makes you lie. He turned to Salvatore. The vending contracts come out of that building. The linen goes to a real company with a real invoice. Every dollar that walks through that door is a dollar somebody paid for a plate of food. And it goes in a register. And it goes to a bank. And it gets taxed. Nothing else comes near that address. Nothing comes near her. That's 4 locations, Salvatore said. Then it's 4 locations. Do you know what that costs? I know exactly what it costs. Vincent Barone was standing very still by the door, with his coat still on and his hands loose at his sides, and he was smiling, and he said, Of course, whatever you think is best. And then he said he had to make a call. And he went out, and he closed the door behind him softly, the way a man does when he's being considerate. Nobody in that office heard him go down the stairs, because he stood at the top of them for a moment, doing arithmetic. 4 locations. He'd been taking his own end off 3 of them since the spring of 2022, and there was one man in South Providence who had been paying him for it, and neither of those things could survive a clean register. He'd had a slow plan. He'd had a very patient, very slow plan. And on the landing outside that door, Vincent Barone stopped having a slow plan. Salvatore had gone home angry, and the office door was open, and the building was empty, and Nora came back up with 2 coffees, because her hands needed something in them. She put one down in front of him, and kept the other, and sat in the chair across the desk without being asked, and for a while neither of them said anything. Then she said, I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer it. Ask. That first morning, there were 2 cups on your table. Luca didn't move. You ordered 2 coffees and you sat there for the better part of an hour, and you didn't touch either one. Nora said, That's what I saw. That's the only reason I went into that kitchen. I want you to know that, because I've let people think it was something better than it was, and it wasn't. I didn't do a brave thing. I saw 2 cups. The clock in the hallway went on ticking. He turned his coffee a quarter turn the way she'd seen him do before. His name was Matteo, he said. Nora waited. My brother. He was 6 years younger, and he was better than me at every single thing except this. And this was the only thing our father left us. He looked at the desk. He'd have been 33 in June. She didn't ask. 3 years ago, Luca said. In February. Somebody told somebody where he'd be, and that's all I'm going to say about it. And I've spent 3 years trying to find out who, and I've never gotten within a mile of it. He stopped. The 11th of February. That was the day you walked out with that plate. Nora put her hand over her mouth. That table, he said. That corner. He nodded at the wall, at the room on the other side of it. He was 19 when this place opened, and we sat there because you could see the whole street from it, and he thought that made us important. He used to order for both of us before I got there. Coffee, black, too, and he'd sit there with them going cold and give me hell for being late. Every time. 12 years. He was quiet for a moment. So that's what I do now. Once a year, that morning, I sit at that table and I order too, and I sit there until it's over. And Nora understood, sitting in that chair, why 40 people had held their breath and looked at their tablecloths for an hour, and why not one of them had gone near him, and why he hadn't looked at a single face in that room. He hadn't been waiting for anybody. He'd been keeping an appointment. Nobody knows, he said. Sal knows. My aunt knows. Nobody else in that room had any idea what they were looking at. Nora set her cup down. Can I say something you won't like? He almost smiled. You've never once asked me that before. You've been doing it for a month. You're punishing yourself, she said. Every year, on that morning, in front of the whole street, you sit down where the two of you used to sit, and you make sure everybody sees you sit there alone. That's not remembering him. That's a sentence you're serving. Miss Hayes. Let me finish. She leaned forward with her forearms on her knees. My mother died 11 months ago, and for the first 6 of them, I couldn't cook anything out of that box. Not one thing. I'd get it out and read her handwriting and put it back. Because as long as I didn't make it, the last time it existed in the world was the last time she made it, and I could keep that. Her voice caught and she made it go on. That's not love. I thought it was. It's just a way of staying in the room with somebody, and Matteo doesn't need you sitting at that table. He's not there. He hasn't been there in 3 years. Then who does? Luca said. Nora looked at him. You do, she said. The living do. That's the whole thing. Nobody sits down with the dead. They sit down with the person who's still here. And you've been making that impossible for 3 years and calling it grief. And Angelo sat down last week and told you a true thing you'd never have heard otherwise. And you fixed it in 11 seconds. And I watched a 68-year-old man put his hands over his face in my dining room. That's what it costs you to let somebody sit down. Luca Moretti sat there with his hands flat on the desk, and after a while Nora saw that he had stopped being able to look at her, and she looked away too, at the window, and gave him that. When he spoke, his voice had gone rough in a way she'd never heard from him. I've been alone since I was 13 years old, he said, in a house full of people. It wasn't a complaint. It was a man reading something off a wall he'd been staring at his whole life. Nora's throat closed. She wanted, with a suddenness that frightened her, to get up out of that chair and go around that desk, and she was aware that if she did it, neither of them would ever be able to put anything back where it had been. She stayed where she was. She said, I know, and then she said, drink your coffee before it goes cold. And something in his shoulders let go. And he laughed, once, quietly, and he drank it. Whitlock called her on a Thursday and said only, come to the office. And Nora said she was working, and Whitlock said, Miss Hayes, come to the office. They put her in a small room on the 3rd floor with a table and 3 chairs and no window, and Whitlock sat down across from her with a laptop and did not open it right away. 2 things happened this week, she said. The first is that the property clerk in the basement of this building finished digitizing a cabinet of reel to reel material from before 2005. It's a housekeeping project. It's been going on for 4 years and nobody thinks about it. Nora waited. There were 11 cassettes in your mother's file, Whitlock said. 6 of them are the sessions I told you about. The 7th is dated the 11th of September, 2001, 3:14 in the afternoon, and it is not indexed anywhere in the paper file, and I want you to understand what that means. It means somebody took a call and recorded it and never wrote it up. Whitlock put her hand on the laptop. I've listened to it twice. I'm going to play it once, and I'm going to leave the room, and I'll be outside the door. Nora said, don't leave. All right, Whitlock said. She pressed the key. There was that flat electric hiss that old tape has, and then a man's voice saying a date and a time in the bored way people read numbers, and then a click, and then her mother said, "Is this a line where somebody can hear us?" Nora put both hands on the edge of the table. It was her. It was absolutely and entirely her, 25 years younger and running fast the way she got when she was upset. And Nora had not heard that voice in 11 months, and had begun to be afraid she was starting to lose it. The agent said something. Her mother said, "I can't come in tomorrow. I can't come in at all. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The agent asked her what happened. There was a silence on the tape that went on for 4 or 5 seconds. "Somebody came to my house last night," her mother said. The agent asked who. She didn't answer that. She said, "It was late, after 11, and I opened the door because I thought it was," and then she stopped and started again. "He didn't come inside. He stood on the step. He was very polite. He asked me how I was and he asked me about," and there was a gap where a word had been taken out of the tape, and Nora would find out later that the word had been her own name. Then he said, her mother said, and her voice went somewhere Nora had never heard it go. He said, "Be out of this city tonight, or the little girl doesn't grow up." The agent said something fast. Her mother said, Don't. He said it standing on my step with his hat in his hand like he was asking about the weather. "Do you understand me?" He said it kindly. The agent asked her again for a name. There was a long pause on that tape. Then her mother said, "If I say his name to you, you'll go and talk to him, and he'll say he was never there. Because he was never there, there's nobody who saw him, and then he'll know that I said it." And Nora heard her mother start to cry, which was a sound she had heard exactly twice in her life. "I'm not brave," her mother said. "I want you to write that down. I came in here on my own and I told you everything I know, and I was going to stand up in a courtroom and say it in front of that whole family. I was ready." She was breathing badly. "And then a man stood on my step and said one sentence, and I'm not going to do any of it. So write that down. Write down that she quit." The agent said something quiet, and her mother said, "I have a 3-year-old. And then she said, "I'm going now." And then there was the sound of a receiver being put down. Badly, twice, and then nothing. Whitlock closed the laptop. Nora didn't move for a long time. She sat with her hands on the table and her eyes on the middle distance, and she did not make one sound, and Whitlock had the decency not to speak into it. Then Nora said, 23 years? Yes. She never told me. No. She let me think we moved because the schools were better. Whitlock said. She let a man in a bakery call her a coward to her daughter's face from 20 years in the grave, and she'd have done it again. That's the same decision, Miss Hayes. She made it once and then she made it every day for the rest of her life. Nora put her hand over her eyes. You said 2 things happened this week, she said. Whitlock opened a folder. The second is that the voice on that tape is not the only thing in the cabinet. There was a body wire from a different case in 1999, unrelated, in a car outside a social club on Chalkstone. It caught 11 minutes of 2 men talking who didn't know it was running. She turned a transcript around. One of them is Gennaro Moretti's bookkeeper. The other one is a man named Vincent Barone, and he is explaining, in 1999, exactly how much better off everybody would be if Gennaro took the weight for something Vincent had done. Nora lifted her head. Whitlock put a second sheet on top of the first. And in February of 2022, she said, 3 days before Matteo Moretti was killed, a burner phone that we have since tied to Vincent Barone called a number in South Providence 4 times. Nora Hayes sat in that windowless room and heard, at last, the whole shape of it. My mother knew him, she said. Whitlock nodded slowly. She was the only person outside that family who ever saw his face on a doorstep, she said, and she took it to her grave. And it turns out she's been the most dangerous woman in this state for 23 years, without ever knowing it. Tessa's call came at 12 minutes past 4, and Nora was awake before the second ring, because nobody calls at that hour with anything else. She got there on foot in 11 minutes with her coat over her pajamas, and stopped at the police line at the corner of Atwells Avenue, and stood in the crowd with the neighbors, and watched. 3 engines. The whole front of the building was gone. The awning had come down into the street, and the windows were out, and there was that orange light moving behind the frames the way water moves. Somebody had the presence of mind to keep everybody back from the glass. The heat came up the sidewalk in waves, and Nora stood in it in her slippers and felt nothing at all. She found Tessa by the ladder truck. Nobody was in there, Tessa said. She said it 3 times. Nobody was in there, Nora. We locked up at midnight. The boys were all out by 20 past. I called Angelo, and I called upstairs at the flower shop. Everybody's out. Everybody on the whole block is out, and nobody's hurt. Okay, Nora said. Nobody's hurt. I heard you. It was a little after 5 when the fire went down enough for anybody to think, and a man from the fire marshal's office came along the line writing on a clipboard and asked who the manager was, and Nora said she ran the kitchen, and he asked her a great many quiet questions about the flat top and the fryer and the last time the hood was cleaned, and then he asked her whether the rear door had a deadbolt or a panic bar. Why? He looked at her for a moment and decided something. Because it started at the back of the building, ma'am, he said. Outside the back of the building. Nora looked at the alley where a woman in a coat had once held up photographs, one at a time. He'd say more later, in a report, with words like ignitable liquid and point of origin. Standing there in the dark, he only said, "We'll be here a while," and moved on down the line. Luca arrived at 5:30. He came through the crowd and stood beside her and looked at the front of that building for a long minute without saying one word. And when he did speak, his voice had gone somewhere Nora hadn't heard it go before, and everything under it was moving. "It was set," he said. "Yes." "In the alley." "Yes." He turned and walked away toward the car, and Salvatore was already there with the door open, and there was a second car behind it with 2 men in it that Nora had never seen in the restaurant or anywhere else, and Salvatore said something short, and Luca said one word back, and Nora understood that whatever came next had been arranged in the 20 minutes it took him to drive across the city. She went after him. She got in front of the door. "Move, Miss Hayes. My mother's recipes were in that kitchen." Luca stopped. Nora heard herself say it, and heard how small it was next to a burning building, and she said it anyway, because it was the only true thing in her. "I brought the box in on Monday," she said. "I was going to copy them out onto cards and put them in the binder so the whole line could use them, because they should be used. She wrote them so somebody would use them." Her voice went, and she got it back. "It was on the shelf over the prep table. That's 12 feet from the back door." Luca said nothing. "It's the only thing of hers I had," Nora said. "Her handwriting. That's all it was. Paper." Salvatore said, "Get in the car." Nora didn't move. "I know where you're going," she said. "I know what's in the second car." And Luca Moretti, who had put his hands flat on a table in a room full of frightened people for 23 years, so that nobody would ever see what was underneath, was standing in the street in front of her, with nothing on his face at all, and she could see all of it. "He took my brother," he said. "He stood on your mother's step." "Yes. And now this." "Yes," Nora said. "And if you get in that car, in a year or in 10 years, some woman is going to open her door late at night, and a very polite man is going to be standing on the step with his hat in his hand." Luca's jaw moved. "That's how it works," she said. "That's the whole business. It's just that one thing, over and over. He didn't invent it. He inherited it. Same as you." She was crying now, and she didn't stop to deal with it. "My mother heard one sentence on a doorstep, and she gave up everything she was for 23 years to keep me out of it. She let you hate her. She let me bury her under a name that wasn't hers. She stepped closer and put her hand on the roof of that car. Not on him. If you kill him tonight, you become the exact reason my mother had to run, and then I'll have to run too." The street was full of water and light and men shouting to each other over the engines. Nobody in that crowd was close enough to hear any of it. Luca Moretti stood with his hand on the door of that car for what felt to Nora like a very long time. And then he let go of it and said, "Sal, send them home." He said it for 8 o'clock on a Sunday at his aunt's bakery, and he sent word himself, not through anybody, which was the first thing that made men nervous. Renata pushed the tables together into one long one and put out a tablecloth and cooked all afternoon, and at 8 o'clock there were 9 men in that shop, and every one of them had been made to leave whatever he was carrying in the car, because Salvatore stood at the door and asked each of them politely, and each of them let him. Arthur Delaney came last, from South Providence, 58 years old and unhappy about it, with 2 of his own people who waited outside in the rain. Vincent Barone came early. He helped Renata carry the bread out. He sat down at Luca's right hand the way he had sat at that man's father's right hand, and he put his napkin in his lap. And he was the only person in the room who looked comfortable. They ate first. That was the old way, and Luca kept it. Nobody said one word of business for 40 minutes, and Nora, standing at the back by the ovens where Renata had put her, thought it was the strangest thing she had ever watched in her life. 9 men eating a woman's pasta in a bakery in total quiet. Then Luca put down his fork and said, I asked you here because I'm going to put 3 things on this table and then I'm going to let you all go home. Nobody moved. He put a small recorder down first. That's a copy, he said. The original's federal property. It's a phone call from the 11th of September, 2001, made by a woman who worked in my father's house. He pressed the key, and Elena Rossi's voice came out into that bakery, 25 years old and shaking, and said that a man had come to her door after 11 at night, and that he had been very polite, and that he had told her to be out of the city by morning, or the little girl wouldn't grow up. Nobody in that room breathed. Renata had her hand at her throat. Delaney's face didn't change, but he put his glass down. When it ended, Luca reached over and stopped it. She never gave them the name, he said. She was too frightened to give them the name, and she stayed frightened for 23 years, and she died still frightened. He put down a folder. And this is the second thing. It's ledger copies out of 4 locations. There's a skim off the top of 3 of them, going back to the spring of 2022, taken before anything was counted. And it's been going out of this city in cash every month, and I've got the corresponding deposits on the other end. He looked down the table. Arthur, they're your deposits. Delaney sat very still. I didn't take $1 off you, he said. I know, Luca said. You paid for what you thought you were buying. Somebody told you my houses were coming loose and offered to loosen them faster, and you paid him for 2 years, and every month he brought you a little more of me. He turned his head. Vincent Barone had not moved a muscle. He said, This is a sad thing to watch. Then he said, Luca, listen to me. And Luca put down the 3rd thing, which was 11 pages, stapled, and said, That's a 1999 transcript out of a body wire on Chalkstone Avenue, in a case that had nothing to do with us. 2 men in a car who didn't know it was running. One of them's my father's bookkeeper. God rest him. The other one is explaining how much simpler everything would be if Gennaro went away for a thing Gennaro didn't do. He didn't raise his voice at all. Say the name on the 2nd page. Vince. Nobody at that table looked at Vincent Barone except Luca. That was the thing Nora remembered afterward. Not shouting. Not chairs going over. 8 men studying a tablecloth, and 1 man sitting alone at the head of it with a napkin in his lap. Vincent smiled. He was still smiling when he said, Your father made a decision. That's what men did then. You weren't there. He was 13, Delaney said. He hadn't looked up. 26 years I've been in a room with you, Vince. 2 years I've been giving you an envelope for something you'd already stolen. Arthur. Delaney stood up. My people are outside, he said to Luca. They'll stay outside. That's all I've got to offer you tonight, and I'd take it, if I were you. And he walked out of the shop. And Vincent Barone was alone at that table, in front of 8 men who had all put their hands in their laps. The bell over the door went. Claire Whitlock came in with 3 agents and a folded paper in her hand, and said his full name out loud and the words, A warrant for your arrest, and read him his rights standing on a tile floor between a marble slab and a case of anise cookies. Nobody in that shop stood up. Vincent didn't say anything at all until they had him at the door, and then he turned his head and looked back at Luca, and whatever was on his face by then, it wasn't a smile. The rain had stopped. Whitlock came back in alone afterward, while Renata was clearing plates that nobody had touched, and she stood across from Luca with her hands in her coat pockets. You know how this goes now, she said. There'll be a case. There'll be a caption with your name in it. She glanced toward the back where Nora was standing. We could take you out, she said. Both of you. Tonight, if you want it. New names, somewhere flat and far. Luca Moretti looked around his aunt's bakery, at the long table, at the oven that was older than he was. Take me where, he said. On the courthouse steps in the cold, Salvatore Grasso came down 2 stairs and put a tin box into Nora's hands, an old one, dented at one corner. 1999, he said. Renata spent a winter trying to learn how that woman cooked and copied every card out by hand into a ledger, and it's been in the drawer under the register ever since. She never told your mother she did it. She was embarrassed. Nora opened it on the step, with her coat blowing around her, and found page after page in a second handwriting. Every measurement, every note. And at the top of one page, in Renata's careful script, the words, a pinch of cinnamon, don't ask me why. She stood there in the wind, and understood that nothing she had lost in that fire had actually been gone. It came out in the courtroom that morning that Luca Moretti had signed his agreement 11 days before the dinner at the bakery, before the recorder, before any of it. He'd given them the whole organization, and he'd given them himself in the same document. Nora heard the terms read out, and heard her own name in a paragraph about persons not to be charged, and Renata Moretti's beside it, and she put her hand over her mouth. 5 years, with the cooperation provisions applied. He would serve 3 at the federal facility in Danbury, Connecticut. His lawyer said almost nothing, because there was nothing to argue. When they let her have a minute with him in the corridor, he said, "Don't wait for me. Nora, don't. 3 years is a long time, and you've spent your whole life paying for things other people signed." He said it fast, like he'd practiced. She didn't answer him. She reached over and took his hand and held it, the first time in all of it that either of them had touched the other. And she held on until the marshal said it was time, and then she let go. The place opened again on a Tuesday in the spring, 3 years later. She had the name put on the window in plain gold letters, Elena's, nothing else, and people on Atwell's Avenue who had known that woman a quarter century ago stopped on the sidewalk to look at it. It was hers. Every dollar in that register was a dollar somebody had paid for a plate of food. She'd finished the judgment 8 months before, the last payment made out of her own earnings, and she'd kept the receipt. Tessa ran the front. Angelo came in every morning at 7 for coffee and sat wherever he liked. And on the 3rd Tuesday in April, a little past 7 in the morning, the bell over the door went, and a man came in with no car at the curb, and nobody behind him, and a canvas bag over his shoulder, and he stood there a second. And then he crossed the room and sat down at the corner table. Nobody left. That was the thing Nora would remember. Not one person in that dining room got up. Not one server found something urgent in the back. And Angelo lifted 2 fingers at him from the counter and said, "Luca," and went back to his paper. A woman by the window kept eating her eggs. Tessa poured 2 coffees without being asked, and set them both down on that table and walked away, and neither cup got touched. And Nora watched it all from the pass with her hands going still. She made the sauce herself. Garlic soft and gold, and never brown. Tomatoes crushed by hand. Butter at the end, and last a pinch of cinnamon out of a jar she kept on her own shelf. 8 minutes for the pasta. She watched the clock the way you watch something you love. Then she carried the plate out into a room that did not stop talking, and set it down in front of him. And this time, she pulled out the chair across from him and sat in it. He looked at her. He looked at the plate. He picked up his fork without waiting to be told. They didn't say very much for a while. Outside the window, the street went on doing what it did. Deliveries, an argument about a parking space, somebody's radio. He had gray in his hair that hadn't been there. His hands stayed off the table, one of them around the cup. Nora drank her coffee, and he drank his. And both cups came back empty. And Tessa came and filled them again without being asked. Here's what that story leaves behind. A person is not a rank, and how we treat the ones we're afraid of, and the ones we think can't help us, is the truest thing anybody will ever know about us. Kindness that expects nothing is the only kind that ever changes a room. There are mothers who carry a thing alone for 23 years and let themselves be misunderstood, even by their own children, so that somebody else can have an ordinary life, and most of them are never thanked. And nobody gets to erase what they've done. They can only pay for it and choose to stop. If this story reached you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel so you can listen to a new story with us every day. I'd truly love to know what you felt while you were listening, and whether it brought someone in your own life to mind. So leave a comment and tell us honestly. We read them, and they mean a great deal. Wishing all of you good health, peace, and quiet joy in your days. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next video.